in a china closet.
Central banking reporter at Politico, and today we're here with Sonja van Lieshout, European President of the World Employment Confederation, and Nika Kerameus, the Labour and Social Security Minister for Greece. So this is about this broader sort of trade-off between AI and the sort of labour market that we're expecting to see in the next years, decades, centuries, as this radical new technology sort of like becomes more widely adopted. So I've got a bit of a preamble. So as the EU scrambles to boost its AI capabilities to compete with the US, trade unions are pushing for better protections for workers who face the prospect of mass layoffs and a potentially wrenching transformation of the global labour market. This panel will explore the various trade-offs implied by AI adoption, how automated workers can be reskilled when AI is expected to shrink the workforce and reduce entry-level jobs, how white-collar and creative industry jobs can be preserved, and whether policymakers should draw hard boundaries over what AI can and should automate to protect key sectors. So I'd like to start with my panelists. I guess the first sort of question is really about that trade-off. So on the one hand, we have the prospect of potentially exponential growth from this technology, which is already being widely adopted in many sectors. But on the other hand, we have unions, like I mentioned, sort of who are very nervous about the prospect of similar dislocations that we, to the ones we saw during the sort of broader switch to services economy, deindustrialization, the onset of the internet, where many, many jobs were lost and didn't return. That's why you're seeing so much social instability across the world, because a lot of those people weren't ultimately re-entered into new sectors of the workforce. So I mean, very broadly, at a top level, at the sort of, I'd like to hear sort of how you think your respective, from a policymaking perspective and as an employer, like how you're sort of hoping to address these complexities.
Well, from an employer perspective, we actually perceive that AI is actually going to be an accelerator and not so much a job destroyer. Jobs will be lost. We've seen it with Industrial Revolution and also with the arrival of the internet. But research has also shown that actually more jobs were created at that time. What we see right now from an employer perspective is actually that 92%, and we've done on behalf of the members and in the world of business, we conducted a research with the WEC, so the World Employment Confederation Europe. And from that research, we've learned that 92% of employers are actually concerned about attracting flexible workforce within the next 2 years in order to be able to respond in an agile manner to AI and to other technological disruption. What we have also seen is that 78% of those senior executives are actually looking on, they know that learning and development is important, but what kind of learning and development is needed in order to and to upskill their workforce, their existing human capital within the company, versus what do we need to attract from externally in order to keep up with the pace that AI and technology is moving with. So I think there's a lot of interesting perspectives that the business world and the employer perspectives have at this specific team.
Can I ask, are you confident that they will go in the sort of right direction, that we won't see? So I mean, there's studies have shown, I saw Larry Summers did a study, and I think recently that basically suggested that capital will accrue to maybe the richest, the highest level sort of earners as a result of this shift to AI, while the middle classes and the lower classes, or the working classes, will be sort of potentially more at risk of automation and being replaced by finding it difficult to sort of re-enter the labour market, right? And that the bargaining power will sort of shift decisively in favour of employers, whereas the labour unions will have less bargaining power, they'll be less able to maybe sort of exert their influence in these discussions over their future as well. I mean, how can we ensure that their rights are sort of continually taken into account while there's going to be a massive explosion in wealth at the very top of the sort of social ladder?
Yeah, for me the key word is here social dialogue in that sense, because we need all labor market actors and stakeholders to be involved in order to make sure that, that we can come to a sensible solution for the challenges that we are facing right now at the labor market. Social dialogue in that specific midst actually of this debate for me is crucial, because the employees cannot solve it by themselves, policymakers cannot solve it by themselves, but employee representatives, worker representatives can also not solve it by themselves. So we need that social dialogue in order to move forward and to make sure that we don't end up in the scenario which you are describing right now, Ben. So social dialogue, absolutely key.
What do you make of this?
Look, I think, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be with both of you on this panel. I think we're talking about a major turning point for both Europe and the world as a whole. And I think it's all about finding the right balance between taking benefit and drawing all the benefits from this phenomenal revolution, but at the same time safeguarding our core values and safeguarding rights and a fair distribution to the population as a whole of these benefits and of this growth. The first point I would make is that we have to see where Europe is at right now. Are we there? Are we ready to draw the benefits of this revolution? Not quite, I would say. And I say this because if you look at the figures, right now in Europe, approximately 56% of the active population possesses basic digital skills. That's way behind compared to the 80% target that we do have for the years to come in the EU. And I say this because there is a gap, both as far as individuals are concerned and as companies are concerned, as to where we are right now, where we should be. So here comes a challenge. How do we bridge that gap? What do we do to tackle this challenge? And I think Europe as a whole should deploy a three-axis plan. The first one has to do with focusing on skills. I fully agree. Obviously, we're talking about a major revolution. We are going to be led to jobs displacement, but also to the creation of new jobs. So what's of fundamental importance here is to focus on reskilling and upskilling massively. And when I say massively, if we want to protect our workers, in Greece, for instance, we're undertaking right now a massive reskilling and upskilling program for approximately 10% of the active population. 10% of the active population is going through this massive reskilling and upskilling program focused on mostly green and digital skills. So that's the first, I would say, priority. The second parallel priority is to focus on competitiveness. And I say this for Europe as a whole. We cannot afford to be the world's best regulator, but not the innovator. And I say this because I think Europe has an important chance here and challenge to step ahead and to fully take advantage of this major revolution while safeguarding rights. If you look at the figures, approximately 73% of AI institutional models are developed in the US and only 6% in Europe. That shows us the way forward, how we have to focus even more, I would say, on initiatives for fostering innovation and rendering a more competitive environment as a whole. Europe traditionally, I think, for the past decades, was very much focused on protecting its member states, one from another. So protect Spain from Italy and Italy from Greece and Germany from France, etc. But we never saw Europe as a whole and how Europe as a whole can become more competitive as opposed to other continents. So that's the second prong, I think, how we can focus on rendering Europe as a whole more competitive. And the third is the point you mentioned earlier about how we can ensure a fair distribution of this wealth and growth that is to come out of AI, and what we have to do in order to protect this transition and protect the most vulnerable citizens. For instance, through revamped unemployment benefits, through transition grants for businesses. And I will end with one question. You know, we talk a lot about jobs displacement and how this will affect the workforce. And it's a legit question, obviously, but it doesn't stop there. Think of pension systems. What will happen if robots replace workers? Who will pay for Social Security contributions? So all these questions which we have to think of now if we want to adequately protect our citizens as a whole.
Two questions spring to me from your answers. I mean, I'll start with the first one, which is, so you talk about reskilling as sort of the main sort of, solution that's being proposed to sort of an upskilling and reskilling. It seems like there's a limit to the extent that that can be done. I mean, for instance, we're talking about, I think there are law firms already, I mean, broadly you're hearing about sort of lower entry-level jobs basically being completely disintermediated by the technology, right? So where people who might have started as a clerk at a law firm just never have that critical formative experience. And you're actually, so what we're seeing is a dwindling labor market where there's actually fewer posts available. So I mean, there's only so many roles that can be taken by a reskilled sort of workforce, right? I mean, if we're seeing actually fewer and fewer jobs actually available because so many of them have been sort of made much more efficient through AI. And I mean, for instance, someone who is a copywriter, for instance, like how many of these people are going to be able to be retrained as sort of STEM-level computer scientists, for instance? I mean,
first of all, I think we're talking about a different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
When most of us went to school, for instance, the understanding was that you would follow one profession for your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
That's already changed dramatically. And that's why I think even starting in education, the focus should be to teach you how to learn rather than just teach you the content itself. So I think that's a basic skill that students have to acquire everywhere around the world to learn how to learn, because during their lifetime they will be called upon to change many professions. So reskilling and upskilling becomes a modus vivendi, becomes a way of life. Yes, jobs will be displaced and are being displaced, but many others are being created. Just like in every revolution that took place, we did have jobs displacement, but we also had new jobs that were created. And I truly believe that, many new jobs will be created. What's really important, I think, is that the policy behind initiatives on reskilling and upskilling should be data-driven. What do I mean? I mean that we have to look at data as far as trends that evolve both within a country, within a continent, and globally. What are going to be the skills needed now, near term, and long term? And once we have that data, and once we have pulled data from around the globe as to what skills will be needed, that's when we have to craft our reskilling and upskilling training programs.
Do you think both of you could give examples of the kinds of sort of jobs people are going to be having? I mean, it sounds like you're describing a kind of digital portfolio career. You assist ChatGPT's notary service in the morning, then you sort of like you work as a part-time AI-assisted graphic designer in the evening. I mean, have you got a sort of concrete vision of how this new sort of labor market might function for individual people?
Well, let's not forget, of course, that by 2050, 35 million people will flow out of the labor market, will have flown out of the labor market, will have left the labor markets in Europe alone already, yeah? That's a massive number if you think about it. So AI can be an accelerator, in the sense that, yes, jobs will be destroyed, but also jobs will be created, because we need to be more efficient in terms of how do we need to redesign and reorganize the labor market in that sense, making sure that talent ends up in the place where they can use their talent and skills the very best. And linking that back to the responsibility for skilling, including re- and upskilling for that matter, because skilling indeed already starts at the early age, but it will continue throughout one's life and one's career. So lifelong learning is still very much valid. And we have seen research, for example, from Randstad, that 72% of talent are actually very eager and very interested in taking on those learning and development opportunities. Even right now, for the first time in history, we are seeing that 5 generations are at work in the labor market at the same time. So we're dealing with massive challenges at the labor market, because we also need to strike the right balance between facilitating all those 5 generations at the same time at one workplace, for example. Linking that back to the 72% that is interested in learning and development opportunities, we have already seen from the same research that Gen Z, for example, if they don't get adequate access to learning and development opportunities, for them it's a deal breaker. They are ready to step away from an employer. So also from an employer perspective, we have to carry the responsibility to ensure interesting learning and development opportunities to all those 5 generations. And then back to your question, what kind of jobs will we see actually being disrupted by AI? Yes, those could potentially be the entry-level jobs that you were describing. Which is a pity, in my view, in the sense that we need the talent elsewhere. At the same time, those first, I mean, remember your first job. What did you learn there? It was the on-the-job experience that you learned. You learned to interact with human people. You learned to listen to your colleagues. You learned those critical thinking, those analytical skills, which we all know are now relevant for the point where we are at our careers right now, for example. So how do we take up that responsibility of ensuring that the young talents still are equipped with those essential skills in order to move up into the value chain to reach a different level of entry-level jobs? I think that's the main question that we are looking at.
Let's say even more concretely, let's say I'm a journalist, for instance. Let's imagine that. And that my job is slowly automated because they managed to invent an AI that's sort of, you know, can write coherently and it can also be wheeled out to conferences to network with people, and suddenly I have nothing to do. Would I be reduced to, would I have to get a new job? Or would I sort of have a more part-time role that's adequately compensated while I'm not doing as much work? I mean, what would you advise someone like me, or in the sort of, I guess, in a sort of grey collar sort of middle class profession, who are, you know, the profession which is maybe at most risk of being sort of automated by this sort of ChatGPT style technology? For both of you.
The question here is more how can you use your talent at your very best in that sense? And we've already seen examples in the labor market and also from the employment and recruitment industry, for example, where gamification is going to be one of the answers to that very question. Because through gamification, by observing young talents in their leisure time, actually making sure that they are doing what they enjoy, and usually what you enjoy doing is also something that you are great at. So through those gamification observations, we are able to monitor which talent, which skills and talents somebody possesses of, in order to then facilitate them to their next jobs, actually. So I think there's a whole world to be explored out there. AI, again, can be a facilitator, but we also need it in order to reorganize the labor market to be able to be as productive as we are right now, as well as in 2050.
Thank you.
Can I try and give an example?
Yeah, please.
Often there's a distinction drawn between professions that may be replaced by AI and others where the human factor is so present that it's really hard to imagine how it could be replaced by AI. Think of doctors and medical prognosis, and think of caretakers and nurses. So the first part for medical prognosis, yes, we may reach a point where AI prognosis may be so developed that you may rely on AI for medical prognosis. But when you're in pain, you want somebody next to you. You want to feel the human factor. So there's a typical example of how, yes, you may see AI penetrating, but at the same time, where the human factor is so strong and so, I would say, present, you will want that human factor. So this, in my opinion, is an example. Just like for your profession, for instance, for journalists, part of your job, as I've come to know it, is to talk to people, to get that information out of them, to try to understand what has led them to X, Y decision, etc. I'm not sure how an AI machine can do that. So in every job, I think there are certain human aspects that cannot be replaced and will not be replaced, in my opinion.
But do we lose something by automating those things that you know, an AI can take care of? For instance, with, you know, if the AI gives the diagnosis, then the doctor's going to become less capable of giving the diagnosis themselves, right? I mean,
No, because you have to feed the system, right? The
Okay.
system has to be systematically fed, based also on research, etc. So you need somebody to feed the system in an intelligent way.
But you do see students, for instance, universities who are increasingly using sort of ChatGPT and chatbots to write their theses or whatever, and the work which used to be very difficult and required a lot of research has now been reduced to sort of entering the right prompts.
Right, and that's where one word is crucial: containment.
Okay.
How do you contain this entire revolution? Because as you rightfully said, I mean, it's one thing to go on Google and to look at the information and 10 sites that come, and for you to try to combine those 10 sites, and it's a different thing for the information to come straight through ChatGPT, for instance, directly on your screen. So, and that's why you see many educational systems and schools around the globe forbidding basically access to such technology, at least up to a certain age, in order to ensure that children are actually developing the critical thinking that they will need later on in life. So I think it's all about containment. And I think the critical word there is containment. How do you draw the benefits, obviously, but at the same time place limits so as to ensure that critical skills are developed, especially for the younger generation?
Thank you very much. I have a sort of more broader geopolitical question. I guess as a minister, this will interest you, and also from your perspective, hopefully as well. So you mentioned competitiveness and this idea of we're sort of in competition with the US and I guess China as well. How can we be sure that it's a good idea to concede a lot of power to these sort of to a technology, to an industry that is largely dominated by sort of Silicon Valley, right? When we're already sort of trying to sort of de-risk from the US to a certain extent, or at least create our own industries to compete with them more effectively. How can we be sure, when they've already sort of entrenched themselves as sort of a, almost a monopoly on AI? We have DeepMind in the UK or whatever, but it's mostly still based in the US. How can we trust them after we've spent so many years wrenching back a tiny little bit of power from them, how can we trust them to be good?
Well, the first thing is I think we really have to go a long way in becoming more competitive, as I mentioned earlier. I think we have to do a huge mentality shift and to move away from a concept where we were focused on protecting each member state individually, which is of course an important factor, but of thinking bigger picture, and bigger picture being how can Europe as a whole become more competitive? Think of the following. In Europe, we have to abide by approximately 100 tech-focused laws, and we're subjected to 270 regulatory authorities. Think of the equivalent in China and in the US. That alone speaks volumes, I think, about how we can try to become more competitive and to view Europe as a whole, how we can lift barriers so as to become more competitive. This is a major opportunity. And this goes along what the Draghi report has said as well. But if we don't focus on this now, when I say now, I mean, now in the next 2 years or so, it may be too late afterwards.
Well, as an employer, how do you feel about the chances of, how do you rate these chances of sort of like building up this competitiveness sufficiently that you won't be dependent on US technology in this sort of shift to AI? Do you feel like they're making progress, or is it the usual sort of indecision?
No, I think progress is there, but I agree with the minister that the regulatory burden is a real thing. And yes, ethical behavior with regards to AI is a very good thing. Our own industry, for example, has adopted AI guidelines to ensure that, that we can move forward at pace with a moral behavior when it comes to the uses of AI. At the same time, the regulatory framework shouldn't be a barrier, shouldn't become a barrier in order to make progress in that sense. And I think it's a good thing to every now and then review if that regulatory burden is a reality, if it's hampering economic growth in that sense. And right now, to the minister's point, I think there's a lot of evidence that that there are some challenges with that regulatory framework in Europe compared to China or US for that matter. So yeah.
Are you both involved in, maybe I think we have very little time left, so I'll ask for like sort of just brief answers. Are you both involved in any high-level discussions over the labour issue, like specifically? So I mean, at the council level and at the sort of, I guess, you know, with unions and with governments. I'll just if you can be brief, sorry.
Yes, indeed. Both at the national level and at the EU level. For instance, in Brussels, every now and then at the Council of Ministers, we have discussions about how AI will affect the labour force and what member states should be doing in order to address the challenges ahead of time, such as massive reskilling and upskilling programs, many of which are done on the basis of EU funding. For instance, this massive program I talked about earlier, pursuant to which we have 10% of the active Greek population being reskilled and upskilled, is being done through RRF funding.
Thank you.
And our industry the same, actually. So the World Employment Confederation Europe is very much involved on the European level with all those stakeholder dialogues. When it comes to sectoral social dialogue, we meet with Unie Europa, for example, but also, of course, very much we are involved in public consultation with the European Commission on the quality jobs roadmap, on the AI in employment upcoming regulatory initiatives. So yeah, definitely yes from our side.
What are the biggest bottlenecks, if you can answer in sort of 10, 15 seconds each? The biggest sort of disagreements emerging from these discussions that you just sort of referred to? If there's any sort of, who's pushing back? Who's most resistant to these changes? I guess at the council level.
Right. I would put it in one phrase. Too much regulation, less innovation. So I think we have to be more aggressive as far as innovation is concerned, while protecting, again, always safeguarding rights. But as I said earlier, we shouldn't just aim at being the best regulator. We should also aim at being a very good innovator.
Cool.
Yeah, and from our side, it's striking the right balance between flexibility and security in that sense. And on how to do that, again, you need all stakeholders to be involved in that dialogue. So, yeah.
Might take a while, I guess. Cool. Well, thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
And now Lorenz will come on stage to give some takeaways. So stay seated.